The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Fridays with Vistage webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some items to help you participate in today's webinar. If you are experiencing technical difficulties joining the webinar session, please dial support at 888-259-8414. When you join today's webinar, you selected to join either by phone call or computer audio. If for any reason you'd like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in your control panel. During the presentation, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that a PDF of today's presentation is available for download on your control panel. A recording of this presentation will be sent to attendees via email within the next week. I would now like to introduce today's moderator, Bill Black.
Welcome to Fridays with Vistage. My name is Bill Black. I'm a Vistage member and speaker, and I'll be your moderator today. Our presentation today is titled, The Workforce Has Choices, Make Them Choose You, with Jill Silman-Chapman. You know, in a candidate's market, top talent has their choice of employers, and it's essential for employees and companies, rather, to enhance their employer brand to not only attract top talent, but to send a continuous message to potential candidates that the engagement drivers that employees need most are top of mind in their work culture. Generations X, Y, and Z currently make up 85% of the workforce. By 2025, millennials alone will constitute 75%. Despite the shift in power, the talent acquisition and management drivers remain the same. Employers must tailor their message to a multi-generational workforce. And in today's presentation, we'll look at those issues under a microscope and discuss their importance in today's workforce. Our speaker today is Jill Silman-Chapman. She is a senior performance consultant for Insperity Recruiting Services. In this role, she's responsible for delivering learning from onboarding new employees to presenting the latest in recruiting strategies, talent attraction methods, and technologies. Jill holds multiple industry certifications, Certified Personnel Consultant, Certified Temporary Staffing Specialist, SPHR, and SHRM-SCP. She's also earned her Master's of Science in Human Resources Management from Tarleton State University in Stephenville. Jill, I'm going to turn it over to you. Have a great webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be back with you all. You know, I like to begin this topic by looking ahead, thinking about what life might be in the workforce of the future. And I tell you what, if you want to study this topic, well, the first thing that'll pop up is when you say workforce of the future, you know the workforce they're describing, what they imagine will happen in 2020. That's not even 2 years from now, right? But when we look out to the future, there's just a lot of uncertainty. Nobody really knows what's going to be happening, and there are a lot of think tanks that spend a lot of energy and a lot of time thinking about this. And one of the worlds that they describe for the future is a bit of a fragmented world, if you want to think of it that way. But one of the takeaways that I thought was very interesting for this prognosis for the future is that workers are not in this world going to feel a lot of loyalty to their employer. They're going to feel more loyalty to a workers guild, an association, a group, some affiliation, because these affiliations, these worker guilds, are going to then assume the responsibility for the members' well-being, their pensions, their training, possibly even their early education. And so it's going to remove them from the nanny state of the employer to this other group, and they will have much more loyalty to that other group. Sounds a little bit like a union or a guild of some sort, but an interesting thought about how that might change our work world. There's another think tank that begins to think about it as a no-collar workforce, if you will. So gone are the days of the blue collar and the white collar, and now we're into a no-collar because it's more a culture of human and machine collaboration. So essentially, the world they describe says that a worker that has been used to just doing the same old thing, providing very standard responses, having to work within rigid processes, they could essentially be liberated by these mechanical, robotic coworkers. And so automating entire processes and augmenting that human workforce so that the human workers can perform higher level tasks. The human workers would be recognized for their creativity and their social contributions rather than just their basic throughput or their basic deliverables. And in that world, HR is going to look at machines as workforce talent, and HR might be tasked with sourcing and integrating those intelligent machines into the work environment. Another think tank describes a world in which small is very, very powerful, where technology is going to allow tiny businesses to tap into the information, the skills, and the financing that was formerly only available to large organizations. So this gives the tiny organization, the small business, incredible power and incredible reach. And this would be a world in which the employers reduce the size of their workforce to a minimum, and they'll carefully orchestrate bringing in these virtual workforces to complete tasks, and then perhaps let them go once that task is successfully completed. I think that you're going to see, if this is the world that dominates, that employees are going to bear a lot of the financial risks that employers used to carry their own selves. Some of that would be transferred to employees, and definitely they're going to be very, employment's going to be relatively insecure, right? And so that we're going to, as employees, have to develop these portfolios of all of our project-based assignments, and then be able to, present those to the next gig, if you will. So it's kind of leaving the employees to sink or swim, identify their own skills gaps, build their own set of expertise, because they're really going to be judged mainly on short-term results. I think this is going to be a world in which those who can deliver results and deliver them quickly, those are going to be the rock stars of the future. I think that there are certain megatrends that we're seeing now that are clearly going to put us on a path to one of these kinds of workforces of the future. I think there are some megatrends that we have to acknowledge. I think digitization, clearly, the rise of automation, and I think shifting demographics. All of those are combining to really disrupt the way that we're working now and the way that we relate to our workers now and how we will move forward into the future. I think things are changing around us so quickly that it's dizzying, right? It's really hard to think about the long term because there's so many complex forces at play, and but I think we can begin to look forward and then think through those possibilities, and then in my mind, just kind of walk backward to where we are today. So what are we doing now that works, and what's going to have to change as we prepare to meet the possibilities of the future? I don't know that the answers are all that obvious today, but I think if we think about the future and then take steps to plan now, we can face it with maybe a little greater sense of confidence. There is no doubt, though, in today's workforce that the balance of power is shifting. This is a generational kind of thing, the changing demographics. As Bill said earlier in the intro, we're looking at millennials that by 2020 should be 50% of the workforce and a full 75% by 2025. That's not too far off in the future. And if you look at what we're calling the connected generations, that's the young Generation Zs, the Generation Y or Millennials, and then their younger brothers and sisters, the Generation Zs. If you look at that group right now, today, 2018, they're a full 85% of today's workplace. And there is a difference. Each generation, as we've come into the work world, approach things a little bit differently based on the values that we're bringing with us. And there's some other things that I think that we need to think about this particular group as this connected generation, is now the dominant group in the workforce. These folks are coming into the work world with talents that their elders didn't have, and still don't have, in some cases, things that their elder cohorts have to learn, right? And this group knows that their talents are needed, right? But I will still say, with those changes in the demographics of our workforce, I think regardless of which generation you fall into, I think there's probably more similarities than differences. But there are a few influences that have shaped particularly the millennials' expectations at work, and I think we have to pay attention to those because they are the lion's share of our workforce today. I think those differences come from some very basic experiences that they had along the way. There is no doubt that this group, particularly the U.S. Millennials, were parented different than any generation that came before them, that the parents were much more involved in their decision making, much more involved in the choices that these folks made, and looked at parenting a little bit differently than the generations came before. Almost, I don't want to say that a lot of parents felt like their kids were on the same level or peers with them, but there was a lot more involvement. Quite frankly, I don't fall into this generational cohort. And when I was coming up, there was no question about what I wanted for dinner. Dinner was served on the table, and you ate whatever was served, right? It wasn't a question of where do you want to eat tonight, and if there are three voices in the back seat all saying three different things, that maybe we go through three different drive-thrus to keep everybody happy, right? So that ability to opine, that ability to be able to influence how things are and to be heard, watch that show up in the workforce. I guarantee you that each of us have some examples of that. And I think another thing, speaking of examples, I think another thing that's important to think about the millennial group is their examples have been different. Their examples are people like Zuckerberg or Elon Musk, not necessarily people who worked their way up patiently, but people who had a new idea, was able to put it into practice and grew to a wild level of success seemingly very quickly, right? And I think another thing that we see showing up in the workforce is that this generation is one that's intent on blowing things up, if you will. This is one that questions. This is why we call sometimes the millennials, we call them Generation Y, like the letter Y, but sometimes we call them Generation Y, as in why do we have to do it that way? Great case in point is iTunes. I used to have to go and buy the whole album or the whole 8-track or maybe even cassettes, because cassettes came out as I was, I think, college age or something. But you might have only wanted one song, but you bought the whole thing, right? Well, this generation said, why? Why am I doing that? Why do I have to buy the whole thing when all I want is this one song that plays on the radio? Hence, iTunes were born as a way to, you can purchase the whole album, or if you just want that one song and play it over and over again, that's your choice. So this generation thinks about things differently and thinks, why not? Why can't we do things this other way? And perhaps that has to do with the parenting as well, right? That as parents, we challenge them to critique things, and we gave them the advice: don't do things the way I did it. You don't have to do things thus and such. Be your own, do your own thing. And so I think that this has created certain expectations when this generation comes into the workplace and as they move through the workforce as they continue to mature. We talked about iTunes, but I think another thing that is directly relatable to how this generation views their expectations of work is this idea of a sharing economy, collaborative consumption, if you will, kind of the Uberization of everything, right? Very much believing in this idea of open source, sharing to solve problems. This isn't a group that's down with the whole idea of intellectual property, right? It should be out there so that we can share, so that a rising tide lifts all boats. If you came up with a great idea, why can't we all benefit from that sort of thing? So it lends itself to a lot of changes in our workforce and in our marketplaces, the eBays, the Craigslist, the Kickstarters, the GoFundMes, VRBO, Airbnb, TaskRabbit, Uber, Lyft. These sorts of things are all part of coming out of this idea of sharing to solve problems and creating that sharing economy. And a couple of other observations that I'll make just very quickly is the whole idea of the gig economy, this freelancer society, if you will. It's here. It's firmly rooted in our workforce today, and I think that in the future it will only grow. So it's not unlikely that somebody's going to work for you at the exact same time they're going to work for somebody else, or that they're going to look at the job with you as something that's kind of a short-term thing as they make plans for their future. And very, very likely you have people on staff that are working for you and have their own little side hustle going on at the same time. Before we get off of this idea of some of the things that are affecting us today, I think we also have to spend just a minute talking about technology. And really, we all know that that's the anchor point of the workplace today, right? And basically, as organizations, we've got to learn how to innovate, we've got to learn how to disrupt, or we're going to be made redundant in the future. But like I said, despite this shift in power, I think that the talent acquisition and management drivers remain the same for coworkers of all the differing generations. We're really the more same than different. Or maybe we've just co-opted some of the other generation's ideas, right? Like, I think it's pretty cool that when I go interview for a new job, that I'm just going to negotiate for a couple extra weeks of vacation from the get-go. But at the end of the day, here's what we all want. We all want to contribute. Doesn't matter what generation you're in. We all want to contribute. We all want to make a difference. We all want to be valued for what we're doing at work. And we all come to work with certain expectations, right? We want leaders who are trustworthy. None of us wants change, really. We all want feedback. We all want respect. And we all want to learn. We want to continue to be contributing. And so we understand that with technology and all these things changing in our workforces, that we have to continue to learn to be relevant. But I do think that there are some differences that we must learn to tailor our messages to these different generations, because each generation has a certain perception and a certain level of acceptance based on the delivery methods that we use. So, what are these table stakes? What are these things that we have to think about in terms of our workforce today and our workforce of the future? And perhaps, how do we promote that within our workforces in a way that resonates with the different groups? So I call these table stakes, right? And I can think of 9 of them right off the top of my head, beginning with what I'm going to call is a workforce that's non-hierarchical. Easy for me to say. I really can't say hierarchical too many times. But this is a workforce in which promotion pay isn't based on a title. That promotion pay is equal to productivity or value to the organization, if you will. I do think that there's a definite shift in the traditional career arc. I think in addition to careers of advancement, there are now careers of what I'm going to call careers of achievement, right? Because if a person is happy in what they're doing, shouldn't they be able to earn more money, more credibility, perhaps even a little bit more power for their continued contributions instead of having to get promoted? Sometimes we're promoting these people into jobs that they don't really want to do, and they may not even be great at it, right? I always hear from older, more traditional managers when I talk about this. I always hear from them, these kids want to get promoted in 6 months. They all want to be CEO in 6 months. Well, I'm not sure that that's exactly what's happening. I think what's really happening is that people are saying, I want to be heard. I want to be listened to. I want to be recognized. And in a traditional organization, really the only way for that to happen is to get promoted. But I think if you let people build influence without moving up the ladder, I don't think they're dissatisfied. I think for a lot of ambitious people, the outlet for their ambition is to have more influence on the company and being a greater contributor and possibly building a bit of a followership. But contributing and influencing and even leading, those are incredibly fulfilling in a way that a job title can never be. I also think that we have to talk about a trusting and transparent workforce, right? And we see this popping up in our workforces in all different ways. Dashboards, performance charts, all hands gatherings, OKR objectives, 4DX, Agile, Modified Scrum, those sorts of things. But I think that there is definitely a significant trend towards transparency in business. I could quote you all sorts of organizations that have added layers of transparency or visibility to their employees very successfully. But here's a little factoid for you. About 25% of privately held companies say that they're sharing financial information with all of their employees, and that's up from 7% just 4 years ago. So there really is something of a trend towards transparency. And I think with younger workers who grew up sharing everything on social media, they're going to increasingly demand this. But 2 points of caution, I think, when we talk about transparency. I think transparency is a means. It's not the end. It's not the do-all, be-all. Because at the heart of any business, the goal of any business, it ought to be to better the business's performance and consequently also improve the lives of employees at the same time. Because if you're performing better, right, you're delivering more value to your customers and improving the lives of employees. What I mean by that is that we're rewarding the people who are delivering those results. So if transparency and your plans for transparency serve those twin goals, that's well and good, right? But if it breeds dissension, resentment in the workplace, sometimes when we talk about salary sharing, that's an area that might breed a little resentment, right? Well, if your transparency doesn't serve the better goals, it's not so good, right? Or if it overwhelms employees with information that they can't use or they don't really care about, that's also not so good, right? So transparency is a powerful tool when it's used wisely. It really can improve a company's performance and the lives of its employees. But the key isn't to turn on this fire hose of financial information. Really, it's about getting everyone focused on just one or two essential numbers, those numbers that will make a difference between a winning year and a losing one for the organization. Because if there's an agreed on target to aim at and an incentive plan that pays out well for hitting or exceeding the target, then suddenly everybody starts rowing in the same direction, right? Everybody starts pulling together. They're not just looking at data that they don't have any idea how they can influence it, but they really become players, partners in the business. I think trust and transparency are kind of two sides of the same coin. You know, there's a ton of talk out there about how trust is one of the most significant contributors to an organization's success. And it's true that employees work hard when they trust you. So I think that one of the ways that you can engender that trust is to trust your employees. And that goes back to the idea of transparency, to trust them with that information, that they'll be able to handle it and they'll be able to use it for good. And if you trust them and if you demonstrate that trust in them, it's going to come back to you at the same time. So I think trust, transparency is kind of two sides of the same coin, right? But it has to be there in order for you to maintain your success within your organization. You know, remote working options are expected among the connected generation, right? And so that means that we've got to learn how to collaborate better, that we need to have tools in place that are available to our workers to be able to successfully do their jobs, whether they're sitting down the hall or sitting across town or across the country. But as more and more of us offer telecommuting and remote working options, the need for these tools is only going to increase. already there's millions of people who, in the U.S., who consider their houses, their homes, as their primary place of work. And if you add to this the other benefits of collaboration tools, that things like better organization, better delegation of tasks, improved tracking of progress, and literally higher productivity. To me, it's kind of surprising that there's still organizations that aren't using online collaboration tools. And there's a million of them out, well, there's not a million, but there's a lot of them out there that are free. But there was a report published by McKinsey at some point where this is knowledge workers spend an average of 14% of their work week in communicating and collaborating internally. So if you can improve your internal collaboration through, this is what the McKinsey report showed, that if you can improve your internal collaboration by using social tools that these tools could help raise the productivity of that interaction, your employees' interaction, by as much as 20 to 25%. And I'm not talking about crazy stuff. There's things out there like Trello and Basecamp, but it might be just using chat or text as a means to collaboration. And you can't talk about collaboration without talking about constant feedback, right? It's important to every generation. I think we all need that feedback, but the need for constant feedback is clearly associated with the millennials, right? And there's some reasons for this. I think many, and of course not all of the millennials, they grew up with a lot more adult support, like I had mentioned before, than previous generations. Not just parents, but it was teachers, it was coaches, it was college academic advisors, it was career advisors, it was tutors. Just a slew of supportive adults that provided guidance for this group almost 24/7. So it's no surprise that they would expect this to continue in the workplace. And I also think that technology plays a role in this as well, because millennials, and anybody who could be considered a digital native, they're used to pressing a button and getting some instant results, right? They post pictures on their Insta account for immediate likes. And even playing video games, as they play video games, it's that rush of leveling up, right? Like video games, they give you like instant feedback. They allow you to learn from your experience and improve your performance for the next round, right? And then that instant gratification of knowing how to do it and do it better the next round, it can often translate subconsciously into workplace expectations. And I'm just here to say, once a year isn't enough for feedback, right? We've had annual performance reviews. It's been standard business practice for 50 years. But that practice isn't as effective in a workplace where there's an accelerated pace of change and constant employee turnover, right? I don't want to belittle the annual review, because I think that is important to kind of set the tone for the next year, but that cannot be the only time that you're providing feedback to your workforce. As I said, millennials want the feedback, and if they don't get it from you, they're probably going to start looking for work elsewhere. 1 in 10 millennials think that weekly communication is barely enough, okay? And 35% of them want it multiple times a day. So I heard this one time. Somebody said, take the amount of feedback that you would want, double it again, and you'll probably be meeting the millennials about halfway. A lot of managers, they balk at the idea of giving frequent feedback. It's just, such a drain on my time. It's a drain on my energy. But, if you get in the habit of constant, frequent feedback, it's not confrontational. It's not formal. It's not stuffy. It's basically just a conversation, right? The ebb and flow of conversation with, continuing to tweak how it is that you work with someone. So you can have some formal meetings, but have informal conversations, your emails, your texts, your IMs, maybe even a little bit of peer-to-peer conversations. Not only does feedback make work more interesting, but it reassures us that we're moving forward. It tells our employees that they're still moving forward, because halted or stifled growth not acceptable, right? And millennials in particular are on this mission to level up or constantly progress. And feedback, if you can give it in real time, that's what helps them to do so. I think we also have to talk a little bit about best tools. Now, I'm not advocating that we all go out and, wipe out our offices and just put bean bags and hanging plants and a foosball table in the corner or something like that. But I do think that when job seekers are choosing between multiple offers, the additional physical amenities, the tools that we can offer, those become top influencers in their decisions. So, the in-house gym, the game rooms, the food and beverage offerings, things like that, those begin to matter when somebody's looking at multiple offers, available to them. But I think even if we don't want to spend money redoing our bricks and mortar or spending a lot of money on new fancy tools and things like that, I think sometimes if we can just give options about how an employee works, how they work, where they can work, I think if we can give some choices there, you're going to be perceived as being more innovative, and I think you're going to be able to attract higher performing employees. The idea of flexible workspaces, it has already been proven to help companies to hire and retain a world-class workforce, and it boosts productivity and performance. But again, before you clean out that unused conference room and move in a ping pong table, you have to think about what you're trying to do. What are you trying to accomplish at work? If you want to create a creative or an inspiring environment, by all means, take away the individual desks, put community tables around, and offer plenty of areas to collaborate in. But if you need your workforce to be focused and productive, then maybe everybody has their own desk and has private meeting rooms. Here's my pro tip on all of this, though. All the ping pong tables, the bean bags, the free beer, all of that in the world can't make your employees delusional enough to remain with a boss or a company that has bad leadership. So, you got to think about that first. Speaking of leadership, I think that a lot of times our employees are looking to leaders to help in their personal development, right? That they're looking for leaders who will engage with them on a personal level. I was working with someone just a couple of weeks ago, not too long ago, on this very topic. And when I sat down with the individual, I was like, so tell me a little bit about the person. And clearly, this leader was stymied. They were like, okay. And so started to describe like their job description. I'm like, no. I want to know about this person. What do they do? How are they? What are they, what are they interested in? Things like that. And literally, deer in the headlights, no idea. What does this person do when they're not at work? Don't know. And the person was having a little bit, there weren't really major performance issues, but places where we saw that there might be some tweaks that could promote more productivity out of this individual. And I was like, maybe we think about getting to know this person. Maybe we think about tying some of their rewards and recognition into things that really matter for them. And, it's not that I'm that clever to come up with all that, but it was based on an example that I had heard at one point where a person was working with one of the individuals in their workforce and took the time to get to know them and found out that the employee was a distance runner. And a simple tweak to the schedule, what time this person came in to work, went a long way with making this person feel more feel like they could concentrate and focus on their work day better because they needed to get a run out of their system in the morning before they came to work. So letting the person come in just a little bit later to accommodate that was golden for this employee. And tying some bonuses rather than saying, hey, I'm going to give you a spot bonus of, I don't even know how much these shoes cost, but let's say I think Hoka's are like a really big, cool running shoe. Instead of giving them a cash bonus, maybe buy them a pair of shoes, right? Because that would say, you get me, you understand me, and I will run through a brick wall if I think somebody's on my side, right? And that somebody is interested in in me. And so that sense of personal development, we're all looking to be better than we were before. But I think we all crave and really respond to a good, a positive coach who can make difference in all the difference in our success. You know, millennials say that the number one source of development is their manager, but less than half think that their managers deliver on that expectation. So that gives us a lot of room for improvement, right? Because I think what millennials want most from their managers isn't more managerial direction per se, but more help with their own development. You know, they want that coaching and that feedback so that they can be more efficient and proficient. I think specifically millennials want managers to inspire them, right? Because in all aspects of their lives, millennials really are engaging with causes, right? Causes that help people. They're looking to help people. They're not necessarily looking to help institutions, right? So the team, the mission, when you can tie that to a higher purpose, it's much more of a compelling motivator than the message of, well, you have to do this. This is your job. Do this because you're doing it for the company, right? Or do this because that's our departmental goal. If you can work on ways to inspire them, you still get the same results, but it's how you encourage that participation, right? I think millennials are also looking for us to surround them with other good people, right? Help me up my game by working with people who are better than I am now, something I can aspire to be, right? You know, especially when we have new hires in our organizations, you know, new hires, they're fragile, right? But they're incredibly malleable at the same time. So a little boost from a more experienced person, that can go a long way towards reducing the newcomer's anxiety and helping them to improve their performance. And lastly, I think millennials are looking for someone who's authentic, right? They want an approachable manager, somebody that they can emulate. So if you can tell stories of your own failures, your own struggles, as well as your victories, clearly, that makes you more of an approachable human. And managers who are authentic, managers who are good listeners, that builds trust. And trust is that essential foundation to build a great team, right? So I think if we can look to our employees to help them to unlock their personal potential, maximize their own performance, helping them learn rather than teaching them. I think that if we can understand this important distinction between learning and telling, and getting them to work together, I think that you know, that's the hallmark of a great manager. You know, speaking about teams and the productivity of teams, I think that we've moved beyond talking about diversity, just diversity. Like I teach HR for a major university, and when I first started working with the curriculum, the content, it was just a section on diversity. But now we talk about diversity and inclusion. Right? It's not just enough to invite different people into the boardroom and onto the team, but we have to be open to listening to their diverse ideas. Verna Myers is a TED Talk. She has a TED Talk out there about diversity and inclusion, and I think she says it beautifully when she said diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. Right? So I think that we have to develop our teams and create that sense of belonging for every person involved on the team. And I think that may take some hard work on our parts, you know, because I think that the barriers to inclusion are the fact that we're in denial a lot of times about our own unconscious bias and our own blind spots. And so this is harder than it sounds. I think, but you know, those biases are stories that we make up about people before we really learn who they are, and I think that we have all sorts of illustrations that advocate for the success of breaking down those walls, shredding those biases and accepting different ideas and different ways of thinking and different kinds of folks into our organization. I read something one time on this topic. I was talking about how years ago, orchestras across the country began auditioning their talent behind a curtain. And when they did that, it raised the number of women in top U.S. orchestras to times 5, right? 5-fold increase, because it was no longer the bias, male versus female, and this is just one example of diversity, because I'm not always just talking about diversity as it relates to, gender, or diversity as it relates to race. Those are important, but it's just diversity of ideas, right? And including those different ideas. I can guarantee you, if you include some of those different ideas, it's not just going to help your performance and your productivity inside your walls, but it probably will have a huge impact on your marketing strategies as well, to make you more relatable to bigger markets. We've talked about this already, but I think I need to, one of the table stakes is definitely being able to provide remote and flexible working for your employees. And I think one of the, some of the companies that I think that are doing this so wisely have developed that they have core hours, right? 10 to 3. Everybody's on deck, whether you're working from home, you're in the office, but everybody's available from 10 to 3. Now, if you want to start your work day at 7 and end at 3, groovy, but you're there 10 to 3. If you want to start your work day at 10 and you don't end until 7 o'clock at night, groovy too. But from 10 to 3, we're all hands on deck. We're all available to have meetings, to collaborate, to work together, to be found, to be able to ask a question and that sort of thing. Because at the end of the day, it's about the deliverables, right? What does it matter what time I do it, as long as I get what I told you that I was going to provide, as long as I meet my demands. And so I think if we take that phrase, if we look at it that way, we can see ways in which we can make jobs more flexible, or even provide that remote element. There's a lot of jurisdictions even jumping on this bandwagon, right? We're seeing cities and counties enact laws that are encouraging our employers to create these flexible arrangements for our employees. And then innovation and agility. If you want to future-proof your company, here's where it's at, right? And I think that it's probably still one of the key challenges, right, is to be able to scale rapidly and still keep your innovative edge. Startups, they have less decision makers, so it's a whole lot easier for them to take the risks that they need so that they can stay as innovative as possible. But as these companies grow, they often experience a downturn in their innovation because they're creating more layers of management, right? In fact, there's a lot of large corporations now that are trying to harvest the success of startups by creating little small internal companies. But there are some things that if you notice these within your organization, I think some cons, some don'ts, if you will, when you think about your organization and your organizational agility. I think the main obstacles are slow decision making, right? Conflicting departmental goals and priorities, a risk-averse culture, and where everybody's kind of keeping their stuff close to their vest, silo-based information. And I think that this is real to a lot of organizations. So I think that we need to take a look at our organizations and make sure that we have a culture in which risk-taking is encouraged. Because that fear of failure, that's one of the greatest inhibitors of innovation, right? Somebody may have a great idea, but if concern for their job security is greater than allowing them to take the risk to try something new or to challenge the traditional strategy. So we have to be able to encourage our employees to take those risks, give them some space, some autonomy to develop some early stage ideas. I think we also have to increase the learning agility of our organizations. Just exploring those new ideas, it's not enough. The key to being truly innovative, I think, is taking risks and then learning from your experiences, right? Because people who have a high learning agility, they're able to fail, to take that feedback, adjust their strategies, and they don't become discouraged, right? And so if you have a highly agile workforce, it means your employees can be reskilled quickly, right? Meet new goals, meet new strategies based on what's going on in your industry. And there was a study of learning agile organizations, and those who had the highest amount of high learning agile executives. It's hard to say. I think that's how you'd refer to it. But those organizations that have a lot of learning agile executives, they produce 25% higher profit margins than their rivals. It's key to the success of our organizations moving forward. And I think another thing that we have to think about is the idea of cross-functional teams, right? I think that there's a lot of organizations that have already decided to harness the benefits of cross-functional teams, because you're getting different skill sets, and again, you're making the pool of decision makers smaller, right? And these teams can benefit from the cross-departmental knowledge and take the strengths of one that shores up the weaknesses of another, if you will. And so you're going to have more insightful and quite frankly, more out-of-the-box ideas. So if you can quickly form those cross-functional teams, you can greatly increase your organizational agility, I think. Well, as we wind down, what are your takeaways? Well, I hope that in no particular order, that you began to think about how you could articulate your vision and inspire your workforce, that you might think about creating more innovation teams, and maybe even the idea of mentoring or reverse mentoring. Being able to do things where you optimize the decision making within your organization. But at the bottom line, we're thinking about investing in our people and our processes, possibly incentivizing ideas, teaching creative thinking, and employing technology as an enabler through all of this. Using technology to its advantage as we continue to try new ideas, and if we fail fast and we fail forward. But I hope that these are some of the takeaways that you have. We have just a few minutes now, so I am happy to take questions. From the group, if you have ideas or thoughts or questions, I'm happy to entertain those now.
Jill, great ideas and great comments. Wonderful topic. And we do have some questions. I want to remind listeners that you can still put questions into the toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen under questions. Just type them in and we'll get to those. Jill, our first one is a two-part question. I have had one of our highest executives leave for a competitor about 2 years ago, and since then we've hired and parted ways with 3 separate candidates. So 2 questions are there any methods to retain key employees? And question 2, how do you recruit executives differently than normal employees?
Okay, so let me take them one at a time, maybe. I think the first one was how do you, no, let's start with how do you recruit them, okay? Because I do think that you have to look at bringing in your executives differently, perhaps than you're looking to bring in, what was the question was normal employees, right?
Right.
But I think there are some differences. I believe that you spend more time with the executives up front before you extend that offer, that you really are understanding their ability to navigate, their ability to contribute in your culture. I think one thing that I see sometimes, I'll hear people talk about wanting to bring in a key executive because they want that key executive to help change the culture. That's a big ask for one individual, and especially one from the outside, right? So don't put more on your executive than they can bear in order to be successful. You may have a desire to change the culture, but one person's not going to be able to do that. So to ask that one person to step up and be that is just too big of an ask. So you want to make sure that the people that you're bringing in fit the culture as you see it today, and that all together you can work to reform the culture or to turn the Titanic, if you will. But to ask people to do that, just one individual coming in from the outside, I think that that's a recipe for disaster. So I think that you have a longer lead time in bringing that person into the organization, more opportunities for them to interact with your organization prior to extending that offer. And then how you onboard the person is critical, because it's not just about bringing them to the table. It's not just about recruiting them, but it's how you bring them into the organization, how you onboard them into the organization, and how you unfold their job to them over time rather than again, drinking from a fire hose. So there needs to be a real plan of action as this person comes in, that things are going to, that they're going to ramp up, they're going to scale up. There was a SHRM study that was done a while back, but I haven't seen anything new to the contrary, but they say that employees, hourly employees, more than 50% or about 50% of hourly employees turn over within the first 4 months. And when we're talking about mid and senior level management, that same number, 50%, turns over within the first 18 months. Now that's an average, right? So there's some, like this organization, that lost 3 within 2 years. And there's others that, you know, may take it a little bit longer. But when we peel back some of the questions and answers in that study, you see that onboarding had everything to do with people's success. And that onboarding means that you're giving them an opportunity to fit into the culture, to assimilate, if you will, and you're not asking too much of them too quickly. So I think that that's maybe part of the answer to how you might be able to recruit the executives. And I think that that feeds right into the retention, right? It's that onboarding and how you unfold the job over time. And then think about these things that we talked about today, those key drivers, those table stakes for employees of the future, and how important all of that is to have a workforce that will take you to the next level, that these things all resonate with senior executives as well as the low man on your totem pole. So I hope that I was able to answer that question sufficiently.
Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, we have a couple other questions. The word automation is a loaded term these days. For some, it's all about efficiency and bottom line savings. For others, it's a world of pink slips. So there's a long history of workers being replaced by automation. Isn't that progress, and isn't the point of automating to reduce labor costs?
That's a mouthful. Okay, so isn't it progress, right, to automate your workforce, and then doing so you're going to reduce your labor costs? Well, I think that if we think along those lines, that we're thinking that the automation can do everything that a human can do, but do it faster, cheaper, I guess. And I'm going to take exception to that. I don't know that that's true. I think technology really can't duplicate a lot of the humanness, right? Technology can't duplicate empathy or persuasiveness even, or verbal comprehension. We've all had, you know, Siri can't understand what we're trying to say, right? And so I do think that there will be, you know, clearly there's already automation in the workforce, and I think that it's going to pick up more steam. But I think that what you'd see would be a company would embrace technology and embrace automation, but looking for how to redesign work so that we take advantage of the human capabilities, those things like the empathy and creative thinking and all that sort of thing, and then augment the humans with the technology, allowing it to do the more redundant tasks and things repetitive in nature, I guess. So it's going to require, I think, some deliberate planning too, because I think we can all work well together, if you will. But in order to make the hybrid workforce successful, I think you're going to really have to look at the roles that you have in your workplace now and kind of deconstruct those, leaving the creative and human tasks to the humans, and then offloading the other stuff to the technology.
Okay, well, makes sense. So, one question we had is, doesn't a hierarchical, easy for me to say,
See, I can't say it either, right?
organization in effect blow up a traditional org chart?
Yeah. Well, so you still have an org chart, right? There still has to be somebody. The buck has to stop with somebody somewhere, right? But I think that org chart does its best to defer to the culture of the organization and to the leaders who make great decisions, right? It's not tearing up the org chart, but listen to your employees to determine the real leaders. Because there are people in your organization that are leaders that I don't know that, as us being by title being a leader in our organization. Look around the room when you initiate a new idea within your organization. Watch how your employees react. I guarantee you, they will all turn and look at somebody in that conference room or and see how they react before some of the employees let you know how they're going to react. Right? There are some unspoken leaders within your organization. So look for those people who you can trust, those people who get stuff done for your organization, because those are the ones that can make things happen, right? On their own, they make things happen, and they know how to work through other people to get things to happen. And so, but I think we need to recognize those people who are true leaders or true contributors. And so, yes, you're still going to have a hierarchy within your organization, but it doesn't mean, when I talk about that, it doesn't mean that those people who are getting things done have to be promoted into a new title, right, or move up the org chart to stay relevant to your organization, to be appreciated and valued. It's all in how we address those people and what we give them to acknowledge their contributions and their value to the organization. So you can have people who don't show up necessarily on that org chart, but you know that they're leaders, and you're compensating them as such, or giving them more rope, more whatever, more autonomy within the organization to be able to produce.
Wonderful answers. Thank you very much. Again, a very enlightening and interesting presentation, and we had a lot of interest in this. So thank you again, Jill Silman-Chapman, for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
I want to remind you about some upcoming webinars with Fridays with Vistage. Put your website to the test with live expert analysis on August 17th. Get a live critique that will improve web presence and increase sales. Submit a website URL in advance for the chance to have it reviewed live during the webinar. And engage teams, the key to unlocking maximum productivity, on August 24th. This webinar explores straightforward and actionable processes and best practices for retaining, motivating, and engaging team members. You can register for all of these at vistage.com/FWV for Fridays with Vistage. And on behalf of Vistage Worldwide, this is Bill Black wishing you continued success. This ends today's webinar.